Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michael Soberman, and I work with the iCenter for Israel Education. The current reality in Israel is heartbreaking and has left so many of us without words. We all pray for a swift end to this nightmare. And with this as our backdrop, how we speak to our children and learners is of the utmost importance as we try to help them navigate this horrific landscape. Many of us are educators, and many of us are parents, and many of us are both. And one of the most significant and impactful learning environments remains the home. And the home, the intersection between the home and the learning environments, is extraordinarily important at this time. The current situation in Israel is incredibly distressing and on the top of mind for all of us. Many of us are struggling with how to speak to our own children and learners about the events in Israel and how to first understand the questions that they are asking us, and how to respond to these questions in a way that is truthful and authentic, but also mindful of their mental health. And to that end, we are blessed to have Leanne Matlow with us today. Leanne Matlow is a cognitive behavioral therapy counselor with a private practice specializing in anxiety for children and adolescents. She is trained as a teacher and a guidance counselor with a master's from Toronto's Institute of Child Study, OISE, and a certificate in CBT from the Beck Institute in Philadelphia. Discovering the prevalence of anxiety issues in the classroom setting and their regular misdiagnosis as academic concerns, Leanne became a mental health advocate who has a private practice that speaks regularly to groups about anxiety. And to help build community, end stigma, and share best educational practices, Leanne founded the annual Mental Health Empowerment Day Symposium, which had its 8th event just yesterday. More importantly, Leanne is a respected colleague and a very dear friend. We will have the opportunity to answer questions a little later in the Zoom. We ask that you place them in the chat during her presentation, and we will get to as many as possible. So friends, without further delay, Leanne Matlow.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everybody. As Michael said, we're gathered here today with heavy and broken hearts and distracted minds. But as you will hear me say multiple times, I think it's absolutely critical that community comes together. So this community coming together, even this way, seeing faces, knowing, I see Israeli flags behind you, I have a few behind me, knowing that you're not alone is actually critically important to help us get through it. At the moment, we are being asked to understand and comprehend the unimaginable in 2023, at a time when we're hearing and seeing things that, at least in my lifetime, are things of the textbooks from years ago. And now this is happening and has happened in this moment. And that is what is beyond comprehension and making it so hard. So this questions and the tips that we're going to go through today, I hope will provide you some structure. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did, but I don't. But I'm hoping that some of the things we can talk about will help you have those very, very difficult conversations. So first and foremost, it's absolutely imperative, and it's okay for you to take time to deal with your own mental health. Whether you're an educator, a group leader, a parent, it's really important that you look after your own physical and mental health. Everyone uses the analogy of, putting your mask on first on an airplane, but I cannot stress enough that you cannot have the mindset to have the conversation, the very difficult conversation, if you yourself are in that bad moment. So I said I'm going to refer to this word a lot, but this idea of building community, this is the moment where we need to lean on each other. These are the moments where we have to remember that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And if we lean on each other, so whether that's your partner, your co-parent, your administrator in your school, if there's a time, step away, ask for help. It's not only okay, but it's recommended, because you can't be your best self and answer these extremely difficult questions unless you're in the frame of mind to do it. That is very important. The second, sorry, thing that I'm going to say is incredibly obvious, but obviously incredibly impossible and difficult to do, but you must find a way to do it, which is setting boundaries on your news consumption. Again, easy to say and hard to do, but it's your brain needs time to process. You are not changing the events by having constant stream. It's critical for your mental health, and it's okay because you'll be stronger when you return. The news will not change because you didn't hear it in that moment. And unfortunately, although maybe there will be a moment of brightness, which we're all praying for, that we will hear it and you'll know. So I think that it's important that we set those boundaries, turn your phone off, turn your radio off, turn your television off. And from that point, what we also know is that our children are watching us. And it's not a question that came up before this horrific catastrophe, right? How do I get my kid to get off their cell phone? They're always on their cell phone. Well, they're watching us. So you cannot be a hypocrite and tell them to get off, that their brain needs a break, that it's not going to change everything that I've just said unless you model that behavior. We know that part of mental health is community and family. So if you can even take that break while you're having a meal, which is the best time, when you can have these conversations, turn the phones off, put them away, don't have the radio on. I know that that's critically important to our ability to process the information, and it's important for the modeling. The next question that I get asked a lot is, well, what are the coping strategies? What do I do? The answer to that question is partially it's going to be different from everyone, but we're really encouraging people to use the strategies that you hopefully have as habits in your life. Exercise, eating well, getting some sleep, meditation, yoga, communing with nature, go for a walk, deep breathing. There is no one size fits all for this, but it's important, again, that you take the time to do it and that you model it for your children. And if you're in a classroom situation, to even practice those things together. And what I mean by that is if it's a youth group coming together, before you delve into this conversation that everyone wants to have or needs to have, actually, take a few moments and close your eyes, play a beautiful piece of music. It's really, really important that now we model and for ourselves use good coping strategies, because the bad ones, the ones that numb us, drugs, alcohol, gambling, excessive shopping, any of those things that are going to lead you down a rabbit hole that, again, won't change the situation, but may lead you personally to more trouble. And so we need to have those healthy coping strategies. If you don't have any in your life because you said, oh, well, I'll procrastinate and that's what I'm going to do later, this is a moment. Go for a walk, listen to some music, bake some cookies. There is no right answer, but it's also very important for our mental health that we continue to keep good habits, eating, hydrating. Do not have a conversation with anyone, your child, your classroom, unless if they're, we call it hangry, right? When they're hungry, they get angry and you're not your best self. So I really highly recommend that before you have a conversation, take a few moments, let your brain calm down, let some chemicals get in there that, make you feel a little calmer. Make sure you've eaten, make sure you're hydrated. So maybe in those classrooms or youth groups, you start with something that just calms everyone down and make sure that they've eaten. Another thing that I think is very problematic is that we sometimes forget that these children, that we are not their only source of information, that they're getting it, unfortunately, I would say, off TikTok. Or other news sources, some of which are not reliable. Some of the stuff that I know I've seen or people have sent to me, I really highly question what is the source material of that. And I think that's another thing that parents and educators have to you know, this again is a lesson that we hope kids knew, but I don't think they all have that ability to critically think at what they're looking at. And I think that that's something where we want to make sure when we're having these conversations that we stick to facts. Facts are things that are undisputed. Facts are things, unfortunately, like pictures that are being released not by some questionable source, but Anthony Blinken just showed something 10 minutes ago that I unfortunately saw. But these are things that are we know are from reputable news sources that have been checked, and we know they're true. Then at least we can have a conversation about what we're seeing without questioning whether there's some sort of, I don't know, diabolical or psychological warfare going on, because we all know that that is also out there and happening. It's also really important that you meet the child at the level and developmental understanding that that child has. So as much as I said, it's nice to have this conversation over dinner. If over dinner in your home, you have a 16-year-old and an 8-year-old, it may not be appropriate to have the same type of conversation in the room with those two individuals. They have very different ability to comprehend. Their brains are developing at hopefully a very positive rate, but they're not in the same place. And that being said, in a classroom situation or a group situation, not everyone, even in the same age group, is going to have had the same exposure, the same prior knowledge, the same ability to be empathetic. Some of them, and I've had this asked to me, a parent said to me, I told, my kid knows what's going on and they don't care. Is that an issue? And again, we have to be compassionate. I don't know that child. I don't know his coping or her coping strategies. We can't force people to care. We can't force people to be knowledgeable, even, especially teenagers. So we have to be really mindful of asking open-ended questions. This conversation and what is going on needs to be led by them. So asking a question, what did you hear? What do you know about what happened? Not how do you feel, because that's a different question, but get their knowledge, their level of what they've heard. The other thing is, and I know this for a fact, that kids go out into the world at school or wherever they are, and this one told that one, and this one's brother's, cousin's, nephew's friend told them this story. Again, some of these things are broken telephone. Some may be true. Some may have changed. Some people may, this is a generation that are also playing some pretty graphic video games. These are kids that sometimes may add gore to a story, and because it sensationalizes it, or because they're actually trying to scare other people. So I think it's, again, really, really critical that when we have these conversations, we don't come into them saying, let's have this conversation, because we have to meet the kid where they are. Have the conversation when the child or the group wants to have it. Again, in a classroom situation, that doesn't have to, it may be, but it doesn't have to be necessarily the minute you walk in. You may want to get people, doing their thing and then saying, at this time o'clock, we're going to talk about what's going on in the current events, however you would want to phrase it. But be very mindful that they should be leading it. Let them have their moments. And the other thing in that I think is critically important, or that I know is children and some adults that we know are not the most empathetic listeners, right? We have to model for these children that people are going to have different opinions, thoughts, feelings, reactions, and that we should not be judging each other for their excessive or non-reaction. And we have to model that by having these discussions in a forum where people are allowed to say what they want to say. We have to give them the time that they need to say what they want to say. They need to be shown how to listen to each other and to be non-judgmental. And in some cases, especially when we're dealing with teenagers, they're not necessarily all going to agree at the end of that 20-minute, 1 hour discussion that we've come up with, I don't know, a solution, a way we're supposed to feel. But in a minute, I am going to mention something that I hope they will come up with, because I think it's another one of the coping things. Another important thing to remember, which is related to what I think I already mentioned, is that these kids all go home to different places. We don't know what they're hearing, seeing in their own homes. We also may or may not know their own connections. Do they have a Sheen living in their house? Do they have relatives that live in Israel? Do they actually have a connection of someone who unfortunately has been murdered? We don't know that, again, unless we ask those questions and give them the opportunity to speak to their truth, to what they know and what they want to say. And it's also important for you, parents and educators, to remember that they may not have anyone else to talk to about this. And for some people, in a school situation or a group situation, you may be their point of contact to get facts, to listen to them. And I think that, again, go back to that word, that we need the community to embrace each one of these individuals where they are, ask them if they need help. And the two big things that are jumping out at me is that we need to give them the time to ask the question and to process all of the things that they're seeing and all of the things they're hearing. I would love to say, we know that this is going to be over at X, right? We in our lives, to manage our anxiety, we like certainty. Anxiety comes from not knowing what's happening next. And so in a moment where none of us know what is happening next, we have to give them whatever tools, teach them to cope, and let them have those conversations. And at the end of the conversation, there may not be an answer. To that point also, a lot of people teachers have said to me as recently as this morning, is they're feeling really guilty because kids are coming to them and they want to have the answers. They want to be leaned upon, but it's really hard. And the answer to that is, it's really hard. This is undocumented territory. This is something beyond, as I said, anyone's imagination. And that's why we need to listen, to be empathetic, to give people a chance to take a break. And there should not be, again, guilt and judgment if in any one moment you either can't manage and need someone else to step in to help you, or that you don't want to hear it, right? That you may, I had a conversation with someone yesterday and she said, someone started talking to me about what's going on, but I couldn't listen at that moment because I was doing or listening or dealing with something else. It's okay to set those boundaries. Those boundaries will help you, which will therefore help someone else cope in a healthy and hopefully successful way. The last thing I want to say before we open this up to questions is, we as humans have three things. Well, we have lots of things, but the three H's that I want to mention right this moment is our heart. We have our feelings, which again, people's are different, but certainly I think it's fair to say that sadness, disbelief, so many things are possible things, and we each have those, and maybe even at different times, anger, distress. Each feeling should be allowed to be you are allowed to have every feeling. You should not feel bad if you feel a certain way. You can't move to the next feeling unless you allow yourself to have the feeling. The second thing is our head. We may think and believe different things about the situation. And again, that's, to me, is that openness to be able to hear someone else and to let them, again, open up first before we become the determining factor of what we want them to know. They may not be asking the question or need the information that we feel they need. Let them ask, what do you know? What have you heard? what is distressing you about what so-and-so said? Asking it like that, you will not make the mistake of oversharing something that a child isn't asking for. And that to me is a really important moment. And the last stage, which I think even this moment sitting here today is your hands and what can you do? And when we have moments of distress, whether it's anxiety, depression, it doesn't really matter. But it's very important. We talk about behavior activation as a solution. What turning that conversation with those children or your family, is there anything we can do in this moment to help? So I know in probably every city around the world, certainly in North America, certainly in Toronto where I am, there are drives of people collecting things because planes are flying over to Israel with things. There's a huge campaign to raise money. Magen David Domes. I don't want to say which organization is better. I don't believe that. Make sure it's a reputable organization. But there are money can be raised by having a lemonade stand. Money can be raised by going through your house and looking for all the pennies and quarters that have been in people's pockets. I saw a local school here is Bring a Toonie on Thursday and the money's going there. It's a way that we can help children, even very young children, feel like they're doing something positive. And that is really important. Even in your own house, whether you're school, public, private, it doesn't matter. We could be writing letters. There are children who live in Sderot, who are now, I heard yesterday, being housed in the dorms of Tel Aviv University. Those kids need some, imagine how they will feel if they know that we are thinking of them, that we care about them, and putting your care into words or pictures and sending it off is a really powerful endorphin rush that helps us in some way heal, but in for sure helps us cope. So asking those questions, what can we do in this moment to be a helpful person to your immediate community or the greater situation, is a really, really powerful thing. And I believe that as the situation unfolds, more opportunities will continue, and even after the situation ends, there will be rebuilding that will be required. So that sort of helpfulness is something that kids in kindergarten to whatever age will understand and can participate in. So I think the adults, youth group, teacher, parents can help lead that. And that is where I think discussions can go to help these kids cope. So in an unimaginable situation, I think we have to be kind to each other. We have to be compassionate listeners to the people who need us. We have to be prepared to step away and have those sad moments. We need to lean on each other and build community. And we have to find a way to do something constructive to help. And that would be, in a nutshell, really at this moment in time, I think all we can really do. So I hope that answered some questions or maybe gave rise to others. And Michael?
So Leanne, thank you very much, and we'll properly thank you when our time is done. The questions have come in fast and furious, and we're going to sort of group some of them together because there are a lot of similar themed ones. And Jake from our office just dropped into the chat a one-page sort of summary of many of the things that Leanne covered, sort of for your own reference that you'll have and you can sort of feed back to. So the first question is, how do we talk about this without scaring or causing anxiety? And with teenagers in particular, yesterday on social media, there was this International Day of Jihad that was declared for Friday, which is frightening to us as adults. How do we speak to them about this without, increasing their anxiety?
So again, remembering that anxiety comes from uncertainty. And of course, I've seen that too. And they literally just announced it on CNN about the Brooklyn police and blah, blah, blah. I obviously have no idea if that's true. I hope it's not, but it could be. So having that conversation is stems from, I know that you've heard that. I know that you're aware of it. What steps can we take to do our very best to keep you safe? And again, kids may react differently. If you're in a school where there's an increased police presence, which in the day schools or in Toronto, every single one, every synagogue has, they're going to be extra vigilant. If you're in a college situation, I think that is where a lot of kids are really struggling. Reach out to your iCenter fellow, your Hillel, again, finding those communities. And at the end of the day, when we talk about judgment, somebody I know said, I'm not sending my kid to school tomorrow. Is that wrong? Again, I'm not a judge and jury. I think that it's important that everyone has to make peace with what they're comfortable with. But one of the other things is we don't want to set up any situation where we're increasing the anxiety, as you said, by putting in these measures that are unmet. We can't do them forever. So should someone choose to keep their child home from school tomorrow, what are we going to do if that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday next week? Is this child now homeschooled? And I believe that's not the answer. It's literally, in a way, giving into what the terrorists want us to do, to be scared. So we have to continue to live life. Those people in Israel are living life the best that they can, and we all are watching to see what they're doing. So I think it's having the conversation. What can they do? Maybe it's not the day to wear a certain piece of clothing and walk around the mall. Maybe, what can we do to the best of our ability to keep us safe, that makes sense, that doesn't set us up? And why am I saying to set us up? Because I got a call from a parent 2 days ago who said, since this happened, I'm now sleeping in the same bedroom as my 14-year-old. Not ideal, because first of all, that child, they're living in Toronto. No one, thankfully, is bashing our doors, and that level of vigilance is not necessary. And I don't know how long this is going to last, but sustaining that level of, I'll stay in your room as long as this is going on, speaks to me like, you don't have to go to school anymore while this is happening, is not a solution. And we also have to be aware that A, it's not practical, B, it's not ending their anxiety, it's fueling it. Because really, when we do that, we're saying, you're right to be scared. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to have a behavior that I'm going to change about myself, like lie in your bed. And that's going to make you feel better. In that moment, it might, but as a long-term sustainable thing. So the answer about tomorrow is, let's all hope it's not true, but in your own home, without judgment, make a decision because of what you're comfortable with. And then every time we walk out of our house, there's a moment of a leap of faith. Every time we get in a car, get on an airplane, sit in the sun, there's a moment of a leap of faith that we really, really, if we step back, that might be dangerous. That something horrible could happen, but we still have to do it. And that's what life is. And I don't want kids to not live lives. If we don't live our life, our anxious life puts us in a cocoon. So I think have a discussion. If your child brings it up, would not have that discussion with a kid in grade 1. And I think that's what some parents are doing. Don't have that discussion. But if your kid's in high school or in university, what do you think? Where could you be comfortable? What could you do?
Thank you, Leanne. For younger children, again, 3, 4, 5, 6, can you recommend vocabulary for a group that may not be familiar with war or this notion that people fight each other, with weapons? Words that are clear, but words that are not going to introduce, something more to be anxious about that they weren't before the conversation started.
So yes. And I think one thing we have to remember when we're having this conversation, on the assumption that most of the people that we're talking to in this moment are not in Israel, most of these kids are not in a moment to moment, they're safe. And I think that that's what's real, that I would start the conversation there. You in Chicago, Toronto, Florida, Los Angeles, we're safe. We're watching something where people are fighting, and they're fighting. And again, meet that kid where they are. If they said, I heard there's bombs and blah, 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 again, that's a fact. Yes, there are really horrible things that are happening. But at the end, those kids at that age, all they really want to know is that they are safe and that you, as their caregiver, are safe. So again, that's that moment where we don't want to launch into the discussion. In terms of vocabulary, let them lead. War is, what is a war? A war is when two people who are not getting along try to hurt each other. Okay, don't then go into like you and your brother when you fight over your Lego, because that's not an those are not equivalent. So I think be very cautious of, this is the moment where less is more. We don't need to give them, exactly to whoever asked that question, don't give them carpet bombing. They don't need that piece in their vocabulary. It's very sad things are happening. There is an army there that's fighting to protect the people of Israel. We could write letters to a soldier and say, be strong, we love the land of Israel. Turn it into an age appropriate thing. And again, don't overshare. What do you know? Is really, really important there, because some 5-year-olds have a 8-year-old brother and a 15-year-old brother, and some are the oldest in the family, and that's going to change. And how close relatives do they have in the state of Israel? The other thing is, if you do know people there, and I hope you do, that are safe, have them somehow communicate to your child, no matter what age they are, that they're safe. In my house, we have relatives in Israel. We have a big family chat, and everyone's always writing, are you guys okay? And what makes all of us feel better is they're writing in saying, we just picked vegetables and are dropping them off at the soldiers. That makes us feel better, because that gives us certainty. I know that in that moment they're safe. And my sister-in-law called me the other day from the bomb shelter with my little nephew, and they're like, we're playing this game. And my nephew was like, he's 5. He doesn't, and he's there. And in that moment, we were giggling and laughing because it was his birthday this week. That's okay. And that's, meet the kid where they are. And if you have relatives there that hopefully are okay, send them a WhatsApp, send them a text, let your child know that they're okay. And if they're in a position, like they're in the army, can we write them a letter? Can we wish them well? Because that's all we can do.
Thank you. So the next question, there are a lot around this, and I'm going to sort of take the moderator's prerogative to sort of, mold them a little bit. How do we help kids maintain interpersonal relationships with peers who may have strong feelings against Israel?
Yeah. So that to me is that, that idea about teaching compassionate listening, that especially, I'm assuming the kids you're talking about are teenagers, and teenagers have very strong opinions. Teenagers like to be controversial. Teenagers, they get a high sometimes from not agreeing with the status quo. I think this is where we have to have conversations where people are not judging each other, and not be looking at the end that we're going to come to some agreement. Those conversations are happening with adults as well. I think if you set up a dynamic where you can have a respectful conversation and agree that before you get to the end of this conversation, we're probably not going to agree, that might be the place. Some people, honestly, you shouldn't be having the conversation with. That's where it's okay to cut people off on your TikTok if it's really something that's disruptive. If it's someone face to face, again, remember, setting boundaries helps your mental health. It's okay to say, you know what? I know that you and I are never going to agree on this, but it might be best if we just don't go there. And I think that's something that it's about respecting that we're not going to totally agree. And I think it's okay to tell kids that that's okay. Now, can kids be part of trying to convince others? A big question that goes beyond this topic. People have beliefs, people come from somewhere. And I think the best thing as educators we can do is say, let's listen with compassion. Let's not, I don't know that we can say let's not judge, because they probably are, but we can listen compassionately and agree to not agree, and not be looking at the end for a solution. And that it's okay if this is a one-on-one thing to just say, you know what, I really am not going to have this conversation with you. We can talk about sports, the weather, but let's not have this conversation. And I think that that's actually good modeling for kids, because there may be other things in their life that aren't really public discussion.
Right. So switching gears a bit, how do we help our supplemental school, religious school teachers, many of whom, are not necessarily trained educators, but are there because this is their passion, from sort of understanding what is oversharing? Because at the end of the day, sometimes that occurs, and then they bring into the home, all of these ideas and concepts and questions that we as parents may not necessarily have wanted them to be introduced to in that way.
100%. It's interesting that people, this is a question, like right now we're talking about a specific topic, but there's other things that we would hope educators, supplemental or not, are also not going to share with our children. There's certain things that are just not public knowledge. And I think that it's okay as an administrator to say that again, I would really encourage the conversation to be coming from the child and not the educator. And I think it's okay for administrators to say, this topic is going to come up. It's current events. It's important to have a conversation. But if we keep the conversation led by the children, based on facts, and remind them that a boundary should be there, that at the end of the day, they're in a position of authority, and that they really should not be, to the best of their ability, giving their political or whatever opinion on one hand, but also if they are struggling to a point that they have some horrific story, I think it's important to tell them that that is not appropriate to share. It's if their goal is to create empathy or to get a rise out of these kids, or make that kid who I mentioned that kind of is listening to this going, yeah, okay, where are the hamburgers? Like, that's not their thing. That's a judgment to say, well, you better care. So I think it's important that educators, and especially based on that story, where we just say, let them lead. And I think it's also okay for administrators to give them guidelines. These are the facts that our institution is, this is what we're sharing. This is age appropriate to this kid. Should you not agree with that, let's administrator to teacher have that conversation, but do not bring it into the classroom, because there's a multitude of things that you should not be bringing into a classroom. This is just another example of that. So I think that that's a conversation between administrator and teacher that hopefully happens before the teacher shares it. And should a teacher feel in a level of distress that this is all they can think about and talk about, it may be a time to pull in a substitute for that person, because they're not mentally healthy enough at that moment to have that conversation.
Yeah, it's part of what you were saying before, this recognition of ourselves and where we are. And there are times where we have to step out and can't do what we need to do, and that's okay.
Yep.
Try to push forward when you're in the wrong space to do it can actually create more harm than good.
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, and this is not meant to be a conversation in its entirety, but rather the beginning or middle part of an ongoing conversation. And as always, we hope that you're leaving here with some helpful pointers, but also leaving here with many questions, because It is the search for those answers that really help us grow as human beings and as educators. So thank you very much, Leanne. Your wisdom and words are so important and so necessary as we navigate the road immediately ahead of us. And you have given us tools and so much to think about. And thank you to everybody here for being with us. We are here to support you in the important work that you're doing, and we're all engaged. And on that note, please feel free to visit our website for more information on upcoming educational opportunities and resources. And that website is fluid, and as we have more materials, more opportunities, we will be posting them there. And I'll just end with a quote that so many of us have seen and embraced by Yehuda Halevi, which is, "Our hearts are in the East, and today they are especially in the East." And thank you all for coming, and wishing for better days ahead.
Amen. Thank you. Stay safe.